So to that point earlier, bubbles provide a windfall of capital and allow a lot of ideas to experiment. That's where we are, right? And bubbles can be small, right? It's if the nuclear bubble collapses, the American economy is not going to get wiped out. We're not going to have massive financial collapse problems, right? But there's a lot
And
of
if it
capital in.
doesn't collapse and we build a bunch of additional power plants and like develop a whole new energy sector, expand like the nuclear industry, then the dividends are going to be huge. It's going to
Yeah,
be incredible, right?
yeah, Mark. The comment and the observation there is that it's asymmetric, right? The downside is so much smaller than the upside. And that's why it's investable. That's why it's interesting. That's why it's worth putting capital to work. And that's why a lot of capital is entering the market.
Just because the facts are A, if the narrative is B and everyone believes the narrative, then B is what matters. But it's our job in our industry to speak up proudly, soberly, and to engage people in this dialogue. Those 2.5 billion people that are in energy poverty, they need us.
America cannot meet this threat alone.
If there is a single country,
of course, the world cannot meet it without America.
that is willing to
We're going to need you, the next generation, to finish the
overhaul
job.
nuclear regulation
We need scientists to design new
and
fuels.
focus on net public
We need
benefit
engineers to invent new technologies. We need
over absurd levels of radiation protection,
entrepreneurs to sell those
then
technologies.
we will march towards this.
We need workers to operate assembly lines that hum with high-tech, zero-carbon
We have
components.
unlimited prosperity for all humans.
We need diplomats and businessmen and women and Peace Corps volunteers to help developing nations skip past the dirty phase of development and transition to sustainable sources of energy. In other words, we need you.
Welcome back to another episode of the Fire Division podcast, where we talk about energy-dense fuels and how they can better human lives. My name is Mark Hinaman. I'm the principal of Fire Division. Have a little bit of different format today. We normally do one-on-one or two-on-one interview with guests, but we've got 4 of us on the call this morning. So today I'm joined by Brennan Moore, CFO at Westwind Energy Holdings, Andrew Meehan, managing partner at Neutron Power Ventures, and my good friend Ryan Pickering, director of development at Oppenheimer Energy. So rockstar cast of nuclear bros that we get to talk to this morning. Guys, I'm stoked to talk to you. So Brennan, but for those that are just doing audio, let's give guys a little bit of a chance to intro themselves and familiarize each other with their voices. So I'm going to go round robin here. Brendan, you want to give like a minute intro elevator pitch for yourself, and then we'll move on to Andrew and Ryan.
It's been over a decade in the oil and gas industry, and really my goal and vision, I've been digging in over a year now in the nuclear space, trying to bridge traditional energy, oil and gas investors and just educate them. There's a big lack of awareness and education as to what's happening in the nuclear space. So I think people are pretty well understood now that there's a looming power crisis in the U.S. and that Mark, your work is quite relevant. The 2 most immediate solutions to baseload power needs being natural gas and nuclear. And so you and I have really enjoyed connecting because we both have those backgrounds of both oil and gas and now nuclear. So been spending a lot of time in this space. My partners and I are very interested in helping both invest and also helping on the deployment side. So happy to be here today. Thanks for asking me to join.
Awesome. Yeah, stoked to chat more with you. Andrew, let's bounce over to you.
Yeah,
60 seconds. We'll time you.
I'm a chemical engineer. I love people talk a lot about 0 to 1 and 1 to many. I love the point between 0.75 and 1.25. Where sparks are flying, where stuff's coming to market, where the idea has been developed and we're late stage development. How do we commercialize it? So that's what we're trying to work on at Neutron Power Ventures. Basically doing SPVs right now, looking forward to a full fund to invest in the nuclear space.
Nice. What was your background prior to jumping into that, Andrew?
I spent some time in biotech, so I was bringing drugs to market at that similar space, late phase 2, phase 3, bringing drugs to market and scaling them in early commercial space. So CAR T cell therapy, shout out.
Awesome. Yeah. All right. And then Mr. Pickering, which most people should know you if they've been on LinkedIn and are connected in the nuclear industry at all. But for those that may not have a LinkedIn profile, a little bit of your background.
Yeah, my name is Ryan Pickering from Berkeley, California, and spent 13 years in the solar industry, coming out of college on the roof and then into a desk and kind of following that wave. And became frustrated with what I saw as like a lack of salesmanship in nuclear, and thought that there was an opportunity for me to make a career shift. And I'm grateful to that my boss Charles Oppenheimer saw some potential in me, and I've begun working with him to finance and develop early site development for nuclear plants. So that's what I'm doing now. It's actually today is my first day as an employee of Oppenheimer Energy. I've been working for Charles for a long time as a consultant, and I'm part of the first batch of employees coming on. So it's a big day for my career.
Nice. That's right. Just like that. How exciting. Congratulations, Ryan.
He has the best haircut of the four of us. I'm kind of bummed that he has the hat on today. The coolest haircut.
Thanks. I don't know. I just felt like we needed more mullets in nuclear. Just felt like this was the moment.
That's saying a lot coming from Brennan. So
Really, really, he's got a flow going.
cool, guys. Yeah, I find it fascinating that kind of the four of us came from not nuclear, and that I think three of us have some background in oil and gas, and like want to apply some of those learnings to the nuclear industry. Kind of broad question, but kicking off, like, what do we think the nuclear industry can learn or take away from oil and gas, solar, previous learnings from other spaces of energy industry?
There is an element of risk that has to be taken, and also government support both at the local and the federal level to build things and to innovate. I mean, the US has become the most innovative country in the world when it comes to extracting oil and gas, and part of that is having support at all levels. You can't a good example is outside of the privatization of mineral rights in the US and the government not claiming them all for themselves, the pipeline system, the pipeline infrastructure that exists in the US that allows us to move commodities around the country. A lot of people don't realize natural gas can't just be thrown on a truck or a barge and moved across land or the ocean without being frozen and going through a complicated process. So the level of support that exists in Texas and the oil and gas producing states has really made a tremendous impact. And I think on the waste side specifically, we'll just talk about waste on the nuclear front. States need to find a way to welcome it, because one of the things I believe is that whoever really solves for that waste problem and welcomes the waste is going to be one of the leaders on the deployment side. So there's a lot to unpack just there, but support at all levels of government, and also support when it comes to handling of the waste, not just the production of energy, are critically important.
It's a combination of technologies, right? The frac was realized because we figured out horizontal drilling and hydraulic fracturing, right? So it was the confluence of multiple technologies that brought, an energy revolution in the United States in the past 25 years. I think we need the same thing in nuclear, right? And maybe that looks different for how it's, implemented, but it's going to be multiple nuclear technologies and also multiple technologies on the deployment front to realize an energy revolution.
The frack. I love that you characterized it as the frack. Like, it's not hydraulic fracturing. It's a singular like technology. Andrew, right before we started recording, you had held up Daniel Yergin's book, right, The New Map, and commented about the impact from fracking and the domestic American energy infrastructure, right?
Yeah, I think it's underreported. One of my favorite statistics that I learned from this book is that between 2009 and 2019, 2/3 of total U.S. net industrial investment was represented by the oil and gas sector.
Net industrial, not
Investment.
even net energy. Like,
Correct.
2/3 of net heavy industry. Like, that's crazy.
Yeah. Represented more than 40% of growth in the U.S. economy. Energy powers prosperity. And that's the message we should be sending with nuclear. Here's the densest form of energy in the universe. Let's build it.
That's crazy.
Would add that I'd like to see Well, I think something that solar does well is no one says like I have an XYZ solar system. They just say I have solar or, our power. And in nuclear, we're so specific and these technology pathways are, of course, far more robust. But I think solar white labeled well and standardized well, and that was why we could drop the bottom off on pricing. And we have like a hyper specific supply chain in nuclear, and it's weak across the board, especially in western state in the west. And so I'd like to see some standardization while allowing for a few different ways of splitting atoms and things, but in order for us to white label and drive economies of scale.
See, I think that can be accomplished in a couple different ways, right? Like one thing that I see, you mentioned supply chain being limited. Well, that's like true of a lot of the industry. Like there's this regulatory capture piece that you can't go out and buy a random widget. Versus like the oil and gas industry, you can change which frac plug you're going to use, like mid well. Like you can decide mid construction project that you're going to make a technology change and like implement it immediately. The companies have different policies about it, but like that would be, I believe, unheard of from lots of the nuclear folks that I've talked to.
And I
Ryan, I
don't
think it's a
know if that's possible, but we can dream and we can certainly like build towards something like that. But I'd be interested to hear what Andrew has to say.
I guess my thought is there's a tale of two markets. There's those who are nuclear naive, who do see nuclear as a white label technology, and those who are, nuclear informed, who have a much more nuanced perspective of, boiling water reactor versus pressurized water reactor versus, non-water cooled reactors.
Yes, and same in solar, we would permit solar farms without even specifying what equipment we were using. It didn't even matter. It was whatever we were buying by container right before shipment. And and again, I know nuclear can't do that, but I think with early site development, it is possible to at least develop projects that are not nuclear, not technology specific in nuclear. And I think there's some opportunity for innovation there where we can, develop these energy sites. It doesn't even have to be a specific form of energy, right? And I think what we're seeing with Fermi America and these, this like new industrialism is that these sites are going to be more than nuclear plants. They're going to be, uh, as Constellation calls them, clean energy centers. And how does that reframe change the way we finance? Does it change the players that are coming onto the site? Change the construction dynamics? And I don't know, that excites me. Everyone thinks I'm crazy, but I want to co-locate and use waste heat from nuclear in factories. That's what the Chinese do with their plants, with their AP1000s that they recently built. They're doing district heating for housing and district heating for factories. And to what I understand, they're also using this kind of like medium grade heating for pulp and paper and other light industrial processes. And of course, my favorite example, Switzerland, but the Besnau nuclear plant heats this amazing community pool and heats 15,000 apartments, and it heats a factory that makes toilet paper right next door. And they're making the cleanest toilet paper on earth, and they've been doing it since the 70s using the waste heat from an old pressurized water reactor. And so, you know, this is, I'm obviously getting into my favorite topic right away, but I'm like, how does it become more than a nuclear plant, and what does that change on the finance stack? How does that change as we bring kind of a whole industrial microgrid to market?
You've got to productize it, right? Like just add the word spa to your product, and like Allo did, right? Allo's spas of using this waste heat.
Is that what Allo's trying to do? Is going to use the waste heat for spas?
They had a prank announcement like introducing the Allo spa.
Oh, okay. So it's already on its way.
Talking about the yoga company. Very
Yeah,
interesting.
not the nuclear company.
Yeah.
Which company is worth more at this point? I wonder. It's
Well,
probably both.
well, yeah. When you hear the LO spa, that is interesting. How many reactor designs do you guys think we ultimately need 15 years from now? Like covering the full military use case, the remote location use case, all the way up to the gigawatt, multi-gigawatt size,
I think that's
massive
like
reactors.
existing in 1900 and being like, how many different types of automobiles do we think we need right now? Like, and maybe that's not a fair comparison because like utility, total cost of purchase, cost of manufacturing, mass manufacturability, like these are all different elements and different product classes. Um, but yeah, I think there's going to be a lot of opportunity in the future for different size, different scale. I guess like Brennan, thinking about the natural gas market, everyone knows like there's big three heavy duty turbines like Mitsubishi G and Siemens, and yet there's a whole cascade of smaller combustion equipment like, Jenbacher, Wärtsilä, Caterpillar, like solar turbines that all make their own equipment. And there's even, technology and designs that you could like public source, like there's publicly available turbine technology that like NASA generated some of it. And so in my view, it's kind of like what does the customer and what does the market need? And if there's going to be somebody that shows up and is willing to pay for it, and someone can build a widget, build a mousetrap that makes sense, then it'll be saleable.
A couple dozen all in when you think about it. I mean, there's Ryan's perspective, which I appreciate, is let's just use what we have off the shelf and let's try to go deploy it as quickly as we can. And similar sentiment from LPO. It's like we're not really in the venture capital business of trying to go fund these next gen reactor designs. Yet at the same time, there is a strong argument and use case around if we can get to the point of domestically producing TRISO fuel, for example. Like there's reactor designs that it makes a lot of sense to use that, especially being able to do so at atmospheric pressure and not having some of the complications that come with pressurized water reactors and boiling water reactors. And so, yeah, there is certainly a spectrum of use cases. And I think it's a good example, Mark, actually, automobiles. Like that resonates in my mind. There were, I don't know, a couple thousand, or I'm sure at least automobile companies. And now there's a couple dozen that are relevant. So,
Yeah, just caution for the investor, right? A bunch of them went broke. Like,
well, and that was really the framing of my question is like, it seems like we're nearing the point of too many dollars chasing the wrong problem. Like I think there's enough reactor companies that are, again, maybe there's a couple dozen that should exist, and there's probably enough capital that's supporting those guys. And then next step of the problem being how do we go deploy these things? So I see Ryan shaking his head.
Yeah, I
Brennan,
think
I
that
have
was the big question at the Texas Nuclear Summit, and I'm sure Andrew has a perspective on it.
Well, I just think that a lot of dollars chasing the industry is a good thing. It allows different designs to develop. It's, everybody talks about bubbles like a bad thing, and yeah, they can be a bad thing if you invest a lot of money and get wiped out. But we want dollars to iterate on designs and to allow cool designs to come to market and give people opportunity to develop. And in the 15-year period, the best designs will see the light of day, right? And they'll make it to market and they'll commercialize. But we want an opportunity for experimentation here at some level in the design space. And those who are effective at raising capital, not only on the technical side but on the financial and political side, are going to be the most successful companies.
Indeed. And in Texas, I met even more reactor companies that I didn't even know about. I collect them like Pokemon cards, and I think, I'm like love knowing what they're about. And I met 10 more, and I couldn't believe how many vendors there are
10,
out
10
there.
more? 10?
Yeah.
Oh my God. Okay.
I was like, who are you? And they're like, we got the smallest reactor you've ever heard of. I was like, try me. And it was cool. And, I think we are in this mode where, the river's getting quite wide and shallow. And that's okay. It's reality. And we were laughing at the Texas Nuclear Summit because some people were predicting kind of like a lot of blood on the ground, and that the river would get more narrow and deeper in the years in the future. But it was all good times. But I think quietly the critique was Texas is saying yes to all nuclear right now, and therefore they're getting no nuclear. And then, of course, on the last day, there's this announcement that Fermi America is breaking ground in 2026 on 4 AP1000s, which, as Brennan mentioned, is kind of the only thing, the only pack of cigarettes we have, so we might as well smoke them. And so that was good to see. And those guys are on a tear. They're intimidating me for sure. And I let them know that when I met them, and they said, "Oh, don't be intimidated. We're all collaborating. We can't be against each other. We're working together." And I said, "Oh, of course, of course. I'm sorry that I brought a competitive dynamic spirit to any of it." And so I'm happy to see those folks leaning in, and Texas will be building NRC licensed reactors as well as all the other things that they're doing.
Well, this is, I think, a good point. I mean, we talk about the reactor vendor and the reactor technology as being like when people think of nuclear energy as an industry, like the reactor comes to mind. But I find that a bit puzzling. And Brendan, this might be what you're trying to get at. Like, there are so many other parts of the pie that people could be chasing, right? Like in the supply chain piece. And so what are you guys' thoughts on like offshoot tangential support industry, service industry, other components, like, and we could certainly talk about fuel. It's the obvious one in my mind, and specifically conversion. Like, it needs to be said out loud, the shortages that are going to exist in the conversion space that every reactor vendor, to my knowledge, it still doesn't know about. They're like, oh, Framatome will just solve that. That's like Framatome's problem. Like, it's like, no, guys, conversion is the industry's problem. But what do you guys think?
There's smart investors seem to ask the question, what is the picks and shovels thing? What is the thing? And Mark, to your point, there's an argument that it's conversion and enrichment, really just covering the whole fuel cycle. I'll take, and that one is very real and arguably the most critical. I'll take the waste piece. I think someone could just focus exclusively on the waste piece, solving for that, and there's a ton of work to be done there, and a ton of innovation too. I mean, to think about hauling waste across state lines around the country for the amount of nuclear that we plan on deploying is just ludicrous. And so, there are technologies that exist and in the works around burying the waste and around storing it on the surface. I think there just needs to be an all the above approach on the waste side. And to the extent that that can be done outside of government hands, whether now or in the near future, will be advantageous. I mean, Mark, you've seen I don't know that oil and gas has the best reputation as an industry on the waste side, because with oil comes a lot of water.
Oh, it's
depending on the
totally
basin.
invisible. Nobody knows about it. We just posted an article about this, and yeah, you can go look at it. It's like,
it's a problem, and it's an area where there's been a lot of innovation. But I mean, with oil comes a lot of water, and most of that water is toxic water that is best placed back below the surface of the earth. And with that has come increased seismic activity in Oklahoma and parts of Texas. And it's hard to argue that there's not a parallel between those two. So I think luckily nuclear waste in a lot of ways, and I'll say this, maybe it will draw some debate, is much simpler. Like
no debate from me. I don't think any debate from any of us.
The mass and size and the downstream potential implications, and it's just much simpler from a storage standpoint. So it's something that we can and should find a good solution to. That's also commercial.
Should we even be calling it waste?
Yeah, exactly. Can we rebrand it?
And spent fuel is what I hear from several founders. What's rebranded as spent fuel, and that gets into spent fuel reprocessing, which, Mark, to your question about picks and shovels, is another piece of the pie here.
Well, so I'm just calling them out, right? We've got deep isolation, burying the waste. There's several, like Holtec has their New Mexico asset, and like there's Andrews waste interim storage, Andrews, Texas. And then what? That like didn't Nano have a product line that they wanted to announce and be like, oh, we're gonna move fuel around with this? Like, am I misremembering that?
Well, they do have a fuel movement business. And then, of course, the Department of Energy is weighing in pretty heavily here as we shelved Yucca Mountain, which still kind of gets revived every year conceptually. But the Department of Energy wants to do a collaboration-based siting program, which is in full swing. And yeah, by the time this podcast comes out, the expression of interest will be open. So you can reach out to the federal government of these United States and request to build a consolidated storage facility on your private land, especially if you're close to a railway. And we'd love to help you with that. It's a specialty of mine. I just wrapped up starting a new job, of course. And then last week, I wrapped up a 2-year project with the Department of Energy and Native Nuclear, working with this collaboration-based siting concept. So we traveled the country and talked about it. Many call it spent nuclear fuel, including the Department of Energy. In our group, we ended up calling it used nuclear fuel because there is so much potential energy. Some call it slightly used nuclear fuel or slightly spent nuclear fuel. I think there's a large rebrand opportunity here. My boss, Scott Lathrop, from Tilhini tribe, calls it a trophy.
Trophy. We did it. We turned it on. It went critical.
Yeah.
Well, because he's like, each canister represents energy for 3 million people for like, I don't know, 18 months or something. And like, and that's it. That's the whole thing right there. Like almost every bit of emissions is right there. And so, as a Native American person, and this nuclear fuel is on his ancestral homeland, it's like a stone's throw through one of their ancestral village sites. He's like, give me more. It's great. You'll love it. Make me an offer. And so I think he's playing a really important role reframing it, because people are like, not on my property. And now you've got someone who's, has a 10,000-year claim to this property saying, like, bring it up. I want more. Let me help you build yours. I think every state should have their own, to your point, Brennan. Like, he's like, and he believes in recycling on site. And so he's kind of been conditioning a bunch of different vendors in this space that are doing on-site recycling, because it's not so hard to move it around. It's very heavy, and I think, and politically it's difficult to move it around. So some of these ideas are like, just build a reprocessing facility on site and then just pop
Yeah,
it
that's
out.
like Elysium's ploy, right?
Yeah. And so I do think that is an interesting place to start, Brennan, to your point, because people really do object to nuclear waste. That is an issue for our industry. I think once you're inside, you see it's kind of a mountain out of a molehill, and it's like kind of a boring non-issue, and that, storing nuclear fuel on site is kind of okay. I mean,
I bet more money has been made like advocating against, or well, just like debating the topic, than any money that's been spent on like actually storing or moving waste.
I mean, it's the cash cow for the anti-nuclear movement in California, because they're getting paid as oh shoot, what's the word? But they get paid to testify. So all these anti-nuclear groups are getting paid by the state government to make comments about what a issue this is in California, because we have, a bunch of old nuclear plants that are no longer operating, but the nuclear fuel is spread out across California. So, it is, I think by industry stepping up and having it be more in the zeitgeist, maybe we can solve it. And our group just released a 4-minute video about like how to apply for the expression of interest and what it is. And I think like when this EOI goes live in January and like 1,000 applications come in from Americans who are like, put the fuel in my backyard, I think it could kind of like tee off like a cultural moment for fuel. And I know all the waste reprocessing and handling companies are earnestly looking to that expression of interest to see how that resets the playing field.
There we go. We talked about, what other opportunities exist, and here we have a recommendation by Brennan that spend nuclear fuel, use nuclear fuel as an opportunity, and then consultant Ryan offering his services with a strategy of how to get an entry point in, right? Andrew will
I
go
mean,
throw
once
some
you
money
get this
behind
stuff
it,
on your
right?
land, like you're kind of in the catbird seat. You land some of these. And I will say too, just to shout out to this program, because I'm sure the DOE would appreciate it, and Lord knows they're not working right now. They have expanded. I think this is a program that really improved under the current administration. I think it was formerly called consent-based siting, which is just kind of a weird word, and it changed to collaboration-based siting. And it went from just a parking lot, and it was consolidated interim storage under the. So they were saying, oh, it's not going to be forever. It's just going to be like 100+ years. And people were like, well, it's not interim in my mind. But so they expanded it from just a parking lot for spent fuel to these industrial centers so that you can have like a waste burning reactor or a reprocessing facility on site. So now you need a lot more land, and they removed interim. So now it's just a consolidated storage facility. So it's always going to be an industrial site at some point. You can move the waste in, you can move the waste out. It's more of like a logistics point for our nuclear fleet. So I think that's great. And then they changed the name to collaboration-based siting, which I think is more true to the spirit, because you have to have this community collaboration and industrial collaboration. It's not this one-time consent thing. And consent is not a word that's popular with Native people. So Native groups that we were working with were like, yeah, we've tried consent before. It didn't work out so well for us. So they're like, collaboration is a little more true to what we're looking for. So, once again, that in January, that expression of interest will go live, and I think we should flood it. I think we should do 10,000 applications and let them sort through it, because I'm a little scared that only like 30 people are going to apply. And again, we're going to have this kind of scarcity bottleneck. Okay, there's only 30 applications, who's going to get it? And, I personally think it's such a low cost solution to the nuclear fuel issue, like build a parking lot next to a railway. Like, that sounds very great. And learning that these parking lots can then be generators at industrial centers as well, which is also great. We need tons of that. So I'd love to see lots of people get in line for the expression of interest. You can always drop out. I think it's like a year long, but like put the initial do some research immediately, find if you have some railway and a couple thousand acres that you can dedicate to something like this, and then put an application in, because that just jumpstarts the whole thing. This is a foothold into the nuclear industry that any American can achieve. And I'm kind of surprised that there's not more of a frenzy around it, but I'm hoping in 2 months, once it opens up, we'll see more of that.
Andrew, what do you think about other tangential tech?
Amir Adnani spoke at the very end of the nuclear conference in Texas and mentioned, asked the crowd actually to shout out numbers. What percentage of uranium is produced domestically? He asked it the other way: how much of uranium supply is imported? My guess was 80%. I was completely wrong. 99% of uranium is imported. And so I think there's massive opportunity, to Ryan's point about government programs and, looking at military-based nuclear installations. There's a whole supply chain that's going to need to be built up of domestic supply of uranium. So I think there's a huge opportunity for investment there. Mark, to your point, there's going to be, conversion opportunity. There's going to be continued enrichment opportunity. At some point, this leads into a conversation about permitting of, how do you allow new businesses to get permits to do enrichment, to do conversion, to handle these materials? How are we going to ease permitting along the line for all of this?
Cool. I love it. Before I say the words out loud, meme stocks. Do you guys have other topics that you want to cover? We can have Cameron edit this out. Sorry, I should have asked this ahead of time.
Well, everyone always wants to talk about meme stocks. That's why everyone calls me up. They don't want actual nuclear advice. They just want to know what
They
meme
just
stocks
want to know
are
which
like
meme
about.
stock to buy.
I don't know. Let's think. Before we go there, what other opportunities are there? You know, as a nuclear developer, I think there's huge amounts of development opportunities, and I hope if you aspire to get into that space, you should come work at Oppenheimer Energy. I'm putting together our internship program, and I just want to hire all the smartest kids and hopefully give you your first job in nuclear and get you going, because we need a little more entrepreneurial mindset in this space, not just in like the tech stack or whatever, but also like you got to get out there. Like we need nuclear land people who are looking at a site and saying, what can this be? And so I'm trying to build a class of people around that, and I think that will help. And I think solar's done that really well. You we got like a whole army of door knockers now that we're just locusting different neighborhoods with incentives and getting solar on their roof. And so I'm not sure if there will be door-to-door nuclear salespeople. I fantasize about that. But we can,
Do
once
you want
nuclear.
some uranium? Do you want some uranium?
I think my grand ambition is to have so much nuclear that we do a lot of retail energy with it, and so you have a bunch of people coming to your house like, "Who's your nuclear provider?" Like I could get you half a cent a kilowatt off if you sign up today. I don't know if retail energy and competitive energy markets will make it that long, and I need 25 years to have that level of ubiquitous nuclear on the market. So we'll see what
Well,
happens.
luckily we're all like in our mid 30s, so hopefully Ryan, like,
Yeah, I mean,
you got
we're
some time left,
we're
right?
gonna be
So,
peaking then. That's exactly when I'm gonna be wanting to get back to door knocking, 25 years from now. But yeah, I guess I'm just rambling about. I'm talking my own book, but I do want to see. I think like what really makes a difference in nuclear in my world is like these former coal communities or formerly industrialized communities or ones who have considered nuclear, who start asking their city council people, hey, what do you think about us building a nuclear reactor? And like it kind of starts at that really, really grassroots level, and it starts engaging with people. And now that products are coming to market, and this is actually something that's not crazy to propose to your city council person, I think like that's the kind of upward pressure we want to see. And then the developers get involved, and then they start stacking. Okay, well, there's a, 1% probability that this will happen here. So, and that goes in some spreadsheet, and it starts informing some supply chain, workshops in the future, so that we can right size to the fuel and the, you know, reactor pressure vessels and these long lead time items that we need of these, few different reactor designs that are coming to market. And so I don't know. I just like to see that, because that's what's happening. That's what happens in all mature energy industries. And like nuclear is just, we put so much on these announcements, and we haven't had a final investment decision in like 20 years. And it's like, wow, we just got to start the engine, and like it's going to be a little bit
yeah.
clunky in the beginning. But I think, we got to get our reps in, and that'll be good for everyone.
Brennan, what do you think?
A little bit about the deployment side. Ryan, I don't want to put you on the spot too much. I realize there's some things you can and cannot say, but it would be interesting to talk briefly about the whole Sandy Cooper decision and Brookfield being selected, that model itself. And also, I mean, in Texas, from someone who's fairly new to the space, admittedly, what I took away was there were three players that were remaining in that selection process: Oppenheimer, Ryan's firm, the nuclear company, and Elemental. So
Well,
it was
so
this
Brennan,
like,
do you want to give a highlight of what that, for those that are unfamiliar, what that was?
yeah, the facility in South Carolina where the project was shut down, and what was it, 2017, 2019? The project was shut down due to cost overruns and even I heard it coined Nukegate and by some people around
People just went to jail. In China, they would have been put to death. But yeah,
yes,
just
some scandals that existed. But what there was is a lot of existing permitting and infrastructure and work that was done that allowed for this site to be used for the build out of new nuclear facilities, the deployment of AP-1000s. And so, ultimately there was a bidding process, and there was, again, what seemed like three candidates: Oppenheimer, the nuclear company, Elemental, and ultimately the project was awarded to Ryan. Again, won't put you on the spot because I heard there were some very last minute controversial things that happened here, but awarded to Brookfield, who is one of the owners of Westinghouse alongside Cameco. And so, like that, but to me, though, zooming back out to the point, is that on the deployment side, there's this massive need, and also this big question now around, like, okay, is every AP-1000 just going to be deployed by Brookfield and Westinghouse? If so, should the nuclear company and Oppenheimer and Elemental and these other guys only go focus on all these Gen 4 reactors? So it's an interesting topic that I think we should talk a little bit about, because the deployment side has a huge need, and also you would like to see more of a fair market process occur in the coming years on that side.
Yeah, I think books will be written about how this all went down. I'm not sure anyone will read those books, but there is certainly some.
maybe just podcast recorded. Yeah, we don't need to write books anymore. That's all. It writes themselves after we stop recording, like the AI transcript. Like,
Yeah, well, while some people feel like they've been released from NDA, I certainly don't feel like the process is over. Maybe I'm holding on. But from my standpoint, this was some most tumultuous week in my career for sure, with all these announcements. And I guess just got to say, I am thrilled with how it's coming together. This could not be better for the nuclear industry. And yeah, we may or may not have been involved in this project for the last 6 months, and we may or may not have learned so much. And I just have, it has restored my confidence in our ability to do this, to see these big construction companies, governors, and all these stakeholders coming together around these big ideas. And I do want to reflect for a moment the hilarity of this whole situation, because, this VC Summer project bankrupted Westinghouse. And then they had to sell their assets to Brookfield and Cameco, who have now closed a deal with the federal government of the United States for $80 billion. And now they are buying the VC Summer site. Brookfield is buying the VC Summer site. So it's like, the reverberations of these construction projects are decades long. And, while I think it was out of the ordinary, there's that a different bidder came in at the last moment and plunked down a huge amount of money on the table. Uh, I think that, at least from my standpoint, the terms of the RFP were open to anyone. It had a structure to it, but if someone, Santee Cooper was very clear that they wanted an incredibly qualified buyer to come forward and deliver for the people of South Carolina. And the Santee Cooper was completely is almost like a public utility. I think they are. And they're beholden to the people of South Carolina, who have been really jerked around by this project. And so, I think they were hoping someone would come, like Brookfield would come along and plunk down the cash. I don't think Brookfield was ready to make that determination. And so people were out there studying the site and seeing how viable it was. So we increased the value of the site. And I think because of this, Oppenheimer's whole thing is like increasing value to site, increasing visibility, increasing inertia around these sites, so that these bigger players can get off the pot and do something. And I think that's exactly what happened here. So we're thrilled, and we want to work with Brookfield. And, Brookfield is not a project developer, so I assume that they'll need some help. And, I think we've raised our hands both quietly and publicly to help on that project. And it's so easy for me because my boss is just the best. Charles Oppenheimer, he just wants nuclear to go huge, and he's technology agnostic. He's a party boy who just wants to bring everyone together and have a really good time and like understand. And this is all in the spirit of his grandfather saying, you know, it's funny at Los Alamos, they were partying when they were building those things. You know, it was like work really hard during the day and then come together at night, play music, dancing, drinking, talking, you know, and because that was the only way you could iterate and kind of understand this like really, really
So it was the
complex.
only way you could deal with the stress. Like,
And maybe there was like that stress component too. And like you kind of like, you know, work hard, play hard, all that. And so I think what happened in South Carolina is a huge indicator that you start getting smart people around the water cooler and you start talking about it and you start ideating around it about these financial structures. You know, and the good ideas float to the top. I really like the way that Brookfield is buying that site. I think they're far more qualified than the three companies that you mentioned to be doing such a major transaction. And my understanding of it is they're plunking down some cash now to get to final investment decision. And so they're, you know, you got to do a lot to resuscitate the NRC license and it's all things that we were prepared to do, and we were going to really have to shoestring it, you know, to get it there. But we had a plan. There's just saying, hey, here's a enormous pot of money to get to final investment decision, and then by final investment decision, the value of the site will be so much higher that Brookfield can pay a premium for it in, you know, however many months that is. And then that makes whole everyone in South Carolina because there's still some debt owed. And so they were able to offer a deal that was so much better than all the other bidders. But I can understand that there's some sour grapes. We all really worked hard for 6 months and then we just got shellacked, you know? And, but I see it as like, we're still figuring out the structure. And Brennan, to your point, is Brookfield going to develop all these projects? You know, I hope so. I think it would be smart. I think Westinghouse is a banner. I think they got a killer deal on Westinghouse. And, you know, we'd love to build more of these projects with them. And but if you know, if we're following the previous administration's 200 gigawatts by 2050 or this current administration, you know, 300 plus gigawatts by 2050, well, we're going to need to build a lot. So I can't imagine Brookfield bankrolling all of those. And but we would love to see a player like them in the space. Empowers me to do early site development, because if I can get the value over a certain bar, which has now been defined, then you know that some big people are going to come in and you know,
You've got a market.
yeah.
so I just got to take these brownfield sites and I got to that are really devalued right now and get them up to that bar and provide that catalytic development and that we can do at a very efficient cost. You know, like nuclear is famous for costing about I don't know, 120 to 300 million dollars to get a site to final investment decision. I mean, come on, guys.
Yeah, which is way too much, right?
That's like binary capital.
Two orders of magnitude too high, right? Like,
right. So I think this brings like a new layer in, and thanks for letting me share that.
Awesome. I think that's a good transition. Yeah, you mentioned enormous pot of money, but there's a ton of capital flowing into the space right now, both in public equities and kind of on the private fundraise side. I'd be hopeful to get Andrew's perspective on kind of private markets, if you can, Andrew. And then Brennan, you know, I know that you guys have been evaluating a bunch of deals, but what has been your pulse on capital markets appetite for entering the space? Like that just frankly did not exist like 2 years ago, 4 years ago, certainly not 10 years ago. This is really transformed.
Yeah, I mean, I think the comment is that nuclear is investable, that there are opportunities to get venture style returns in the nuclear landscape these days, where 10 years ago, you know, immediately post Fukushima, people were shutting down plants, right? So we, to that point earlier, bubbles provide a windfall of capital and allow a lot of ideas to experiment. That's where we are, right? And bubbles can be small, right? It's if the nuclear bubble collapses, the American economy is not going to get wiped out. We're not going to have massive financial collapse problems, right? But there's a lot
And
of
if it
capital.
doesn't collapse and we build a bunch of additional power plants and like develop a whole new energy sector, expand like the nuclear industry, then the dividends are going to be huge. It's going to be incredible, right?
Yeah, Mark, the comment and the observation there is that it's asymmetric, right? The downside is so much smaller than the upside. And that's why it's investable. That's why it's interesting. That's why it's worth putting capital to work. And that's why a lot of capital is entering the market. One observation to your point about private versus public markets is private markets have a lot more friction, I guess, in valuations, right? If you start a Series B and you price the round, that price holds throughout the close until you raise your next round. Public markets are fluid, and we've seen, we can talk about Oklo here. Pierce $25 billion.
Have we talked
in
about
market
Oklo
cap.
yet? I don't think we've talked about Oklo yet.
No, I was going to bring it up when we were talking about fuel recycling. That was kind of burying the lead of, that's one of their key value props, right? And so, the comps look great from a private market perspective if you're looking at a $25 billion company that doesn't have a reactor operational.
And Andrew and I have been playing a lot in the same space and really respect the framework that he's developed from really from an engineer standpoint, and mine's more from a finance background. Yeah, in a way, Oklo's making things challenging, I would say, because what's hard is most of the investors that we're talking to are seasoned investors that want some line of sight to cash flow. And, we have this whole chicken or the egg issue, whether it's the deployers saying like, hey, get me a project, and then I can go raise the capital around that project, which is what Ryan and his team have been up to, or the utilities saying, get me proven technology, and then I'll give you a PPA, or, the tech companies, I'll give you a PPA to buy the power. And then the reactors company saying, well, I need the PPA to go raise the money to develop the technology to generate. So, right now, all we have is comps. Like the way I'm framing it to people is we're investing in technology to then get to early deployment, first of a kind, early into a kind, which is going to be a disaster, by the way. Like I'm just going to raise my hand and say it. Like it's going to be, and it has to be.
It's going to be tough.
It's going to be tough. And then we're going to get to develop deployment. Okay. And like that's going to be the next decade. Okay, great. Where do you want to be in that? Well, some people want to be throughout the whole spectrum. I don't think Blackstone and the big infrastructure guys and PE guys show up until phase 3. And most sophisticated guys are having a hard time with phase 1 because phase 1 is venture investing, which is what Andrew and I are spending a lot of time on. And there's no line of sight to cash flow. Okay. Like on the reactor side, it's like, okay, we know rough timelines and there's LCOE estimates and all that, but like they're all just assumptions. What's challenging right now is it's all comps. So what is the comp? Well, everyone's pointing to Oklo. So all the valuations have been pulled up, which is good for the companies, but it's not so great for capital that needs to come into the space and be able to underwrite something. So, Terrestrial de-SPAC'd last week, and that was one where there's a few deals in market right now that we're saying like, hey, well, we're not gonna price till Terrestrial prices, and Terrestrial is saying, well, we're gonna price where Oklo prices because like we're not that different from a development standpoint. And so Terrestrial actually, it hasn't taken off like you might have thought, and I think it's a good thing because it's tempered expectations a little bit on the valuation front. And I mean, we're looking at a deal right now that they did a priced round recently. It was a series round, and now they're 3x that number. And I asked the question recently, why? And the answer is, well, we'll look at Oklo. and granted, every 6 months is like half a decade in nuclear right now because things are moving. But I think Oklo has made things challenging in a sense because now expectations are, we're going to do a SPAC. We're going to do it as fast as we can. Once we de-SPAC, we're going to be worth $20 billion. And then we'll print money to go develop the technology. We'll figure it out.
So, Brennan, I want you to expand on this a little bit because, what you talk about, this class, the second phase, this other class of sophisticated investors that are accustomed to like making discount cash flow models and like having forecasted revenues. This feels like this conversation almost doesn't exist in the nuclear space. They're like, well, it takes 10 years to build a power plant. And you're like, well, I can't underwrite that. Like, I can't, that's financeable. Like, so can you just talk a little bit about, I guess, other energy projects and how that financing works and why that matters? And I mean, cost of capital, and it's probably a hyper simplistic conversation for you, but yeah, just expand on it a little bit more.
I always go back to oil and gas, which is pretty different from like the return profile of a shale well, but not drastically different from a risk profile. I mean, the reality is that these projects have uncertain variables. Those uncertain variables are mostly time and capex. So why did time and capex matter? Well, capex is all spent at time zero. So in any DCF model, the capital that goes out the door at time zero is meaningful and matters. And then time, when you're using a high discount rate, which you have to do to make it commensurate with the return profile of these, or with the risk profile of these, a high discount rate really eats away at your returns as you move through longer and longer periods of time. So if you say, I'm going to spend $2 billion building out this nuclear facility, which, by the way, is not very bankable yet because the technology is not proven. So it's going to need to be 50+% equity. We're going to have to use $1 billion of equity to develop this first, second, third of a kind facility. But that billion might actually be 1.5 because we haven't proven that we can be within a 50% margin of error on capex. So it might be 1.5, it might be 1, and it might take 5 years and it might take 8. That investor, just from what I just told you, is going to require 25-30% returns to underwrite the risk of that. And they're going to need to go do 10 of those. So they're going to need to do probably 10 different projects because 4 or 5 of them are going to take longer, be more expensive than they thought. And by the way, they're all going to take longer, be more expensive, but like even worse than their downside case. And so what happens there is it makes the project really sensitive to capex and time. So we need to really hone in on what is this thing going to cost at time zero and how long is it going to take? Because when you start discounting annual cash flows by a 30% discount rate, I mean, you have to have a massive margin in a project that's going out 5, 7, 10 years to support discount rates of that size. So I'll try not to go too much more in the details on that because it might be a bit technical and boring, but yeah, that's from my perspective, the phase 2 projects, it's really critical to find the right DevCo models and the right level of government support and insurance and private capital to build those out.
That just screams to me like build it smaller, test it, iterate, do it faster. Like which I think is kind of Andrew's strategy, right? Like, or I don't know, some of the technology that he's been looking at.
SMRs as the bridge for a lot of reasons. It's a great point.
I will say though, I have a both and approach. I think we need AP1000s and we need factory production of SMRs, right? We need as much energy production from atomic energy as we can get. So, I think there's opportunity for financial returns in both spaces.
Do you guys think there's a risk of, I mean, like the Oklo skyrocket to the moon euphoria has been exciting. Certainly, if you bought in, I did not, which is just tragic. But it's like, man, at what point are you going to buy in? Like, but is there a chance that some of this has a negative impact on kind of or people see some downside and get less excited about it? I mean, Brennan, I think you said tempering expectations. That was good, but.
Brief. I think the question has to be asked if you enter Oklo, let's just use Oklo. If you enter Oklo right now, what needs to happen for you to make money on that? Let's call it an investment, not a trade. Let's just wipe out the traders and say we're investing. What needs to happen for Oklo to be worth $60 billion business 5 years from now? So to get a 3x in 5 years is a 25% IRR. What needs to happen for me to make 25% on investing in Oklo right now over the next 5 years? A lot. Like if you were to go underwrite every single reactor, and let's say they don't have whatever, let's say they have a fuel business that's half their business someday, but how many reactors need to be deployed? What's the margin on those reactors? If you start doing actual math, a lot needs to happen for Oklo to become a $60 billion market cap business. So, and then what needs to happen? Take the other side. What needs to happen for Oklo to become a $10 billion business from 20? What happens for me to lose half my money? there's arguably a stronger case on that side than on the $60 billion side. So then it becomes, okay, well, maybe Oklo's not the answer. Maybe I should deploy that capital into the private space, which is where, again, Andrew and I are spending our time, because I think that there's guys that are close or even at the same or more advanced levels than them that aren't trading nearly at those valuations. So
Fantastic answer. Yeah, that's a really simple way to think about it, but like you could find a lower priced equity or technology company that you stand the chance there's more upside than not, right? Yeah.
To that point, what's the over under on pilot reactors to go critical by July 4th of next year?
Good question. What's the list? Do we have an official list of who's on that program?
quick,
Get it.
Andrew, my view that I've developed talking to smart people is maximum one, like real criticality. And it would be Radiant with their dome project. And I think a lot, I will also say, I think a lot of capital is going to be incinerated moving towards this date on things that might not be moving towards commerciality, but are moving towards technically meeting this hurdle that's been set. I also tip my hat to the government saying like, hey, it's at least getting us moving in the right direction. So I'm going to say one.
All right. Are we taking bets on this? Is this public pronouncement if you're actually going to go public?
I think one's a pretty good over under, frankly.
I'm going to be optimistic and say we'll take the high side, 5. 5 of 10, 50% go critical by then. But
I agree with Brennan that the government's positioning on this is a great thing. It's not a situation where industry can point at the government and say, here's what's slowing us down. Government says, hey, look, you've got our full support. We've actually set the mark so hard that nobody's going to make it. And, realistically, I'm taking the under. I don't think we're going to see a reactor go critical. If I had to choose one, I would think potentially the Alo reactor, but we'll see.
More than anything, it is a catalyst that has pushed people to act. Like, that's been my perspective, which has been incredibly helpful. Like, you can't blame regulations anymore for inaction, right? You're like, nope, you've got the government like giving you the green light effectively, more so than you have almost ever. And it's forcing more advanced conversations. That's been my perspective, which is really, really healthy for the industry. It might be painful and there might be some capital destroyed. This happens, right? Like we can, when we get hyper exuberant and try to move faster, then you can have some waste in the process. But I'm encouraged by the fact that things are moving forward.
So I've got the list here: Alo, Antares, Atomic Alchemy, Deep Fission, Last Energy, Natura Resources, Radiant, Terrestrial, Valor Atomics, and Oklo has 2 sites. So it's 10 companies with 11 sites. And yeah, what a party. It does kind of feel like the Manhattan Project a little bit, like everyone like just rip it up, do a lot of different ideas. I am mindful of Brennan's point of like, what are we incentivizing here? Because it's not electricity generation, to be clear. It's just going critical for what I understand is like a very short amount of time. It's not even really a sustained criticality. But maybe you guys know more about it than I do. I thought it was just.
Well, I will actually comment on the program is interesting, but is it the most helpful? Like maybe a different way to structure this. Like if I go back in chat time and like have influence that would have pushed this in a different direction, it would have been to effectively grant a commercial license. Like if you can demonstrate a prototype and it works and it's safe, then like you can circumvent the NRC process and you don't have to get a commercial license from the NRC. And then you can just start making money. Because as it stands, like this is just a prototype and you still have to go get a license from the NRC in order to sell electricity. And to Brennan's point about like getting to cash flow faster, getting to revenue faster, that's not helpful. Like
Yeah.
you're not solving the time problem there, unless it's accelerating licensing, and like the prototype can demonstrate some performance that can make licensing or going through the NRC process faster, which I think like people are thinking about that and thinking about how it can be that part of the licensing process can be reciprocal, right? And the NRC and the DOE are working close together on that, but like it's not immediately solving the problem.
Mark,
So if I could change something, I would change that.
let's talk about regulators for a minute. You said something there that if they can prove that the reactor is safe and it works, right? Um, the FDA for drug products to go to the market have a statistical perspective that you have to prove your product is safe and efficacious. And if you meet those two criteria through your phase trials, you can take your drug and you can sell it. The NRC has a prescriptive approach of here are all the check boxes you have to meet. Here's containment, even if you're not a pressurized reactor, et cetera. And so one of my hopes actually from this DOE project is to spin out a regulatory body for advanced reactors. Maybe that could be a set of prescriptions, not prescriptions, but a set of a framework that's adopted by the NRC, and it can go through the NRC process. Perhaps it's a state level regulator. You know, there was some conversation in Texas about a Texas regulatory body and doing state level licensing. But I do think that this is one of the pieces that needs regulatory reform, and you hit the nail on the head. Is it safe and does it work?
Which like let's be clear, these things are so safe. It's bonkers like how safe the technology is. It's I don't know, compared to everything else that I've done in my life and career, I'm like, guys, wow, this is a no-brainer. Like
And waste, which I think is a great idea, by the way, Andrew. I actually have told some people that we should just rename nuclear fission. Like we should just announce some new form of energy and remove the word nuclear because people don't understand it at all. Like your layman does not understand that nuclear energy is different from nuclear weapons, and there's a big perception issue, which luckily is getting better, but yeah, it's challenging.
that's why like do any of us have the word nuclear in our company names?
Yeah, people have gone away from that, and I think vision is ripe. People still don't know what it is, and credit to Mark in the name of this podcast. And you know, my boss often says like fission for good is our unofficial motto. I think that has to do with his family being lumped into fission for bad, and so they really want to clarify. And yeah, I agree. I think wow, a new regulator would be very interesting. Andrew, what do you think about the DOE being a regulator? You know, they kind of are, and you can license through them, but that's not a muscle that's very strong yet. Do you predict to see DOE become that secondary licensing pathway?
I would welcome a DOE regulatory body because they've been working with these companies since day one, right? The NRC has already shown that they've rejected an Oklo application. The reason I understand is due to not having a containment vessel, right? And it's like, well, there's a disconnect here. We have prescriptive regulation on the NRC side that works great for pressurized water reactors. You know, if we add that word to the NRC mandate, if you're responsible for regulating water cooled reactors, great. They can continue with that regulatory framework and, operate as such. The DOE has basically day one experience with many of these advanced fission companies. And so spinning out a regulatory body there, I'm also open to state level regulators. I think Texas has shown that they know how to work with businesses to ensure that we can get industry up and operational. And so, I would be curious to see what a framework would look like from a Texas state regulator, and bypass, federal licensing from that perspective. Kind of give states an opt-in, opt-out to, they can defer to a federal regulator, but if they're interested in pooling the resources and investing and standing up their own regulatory body, power to them.
So
Go ahead, Ryan.
does that show your hand on how you feel about like this Utah and Texas lawsuit with Allo and Last Energy? Love to. I haven't heard an update on that in the last few weeks.
I think at some level, yeah, it does. I don't have much of an update either, but I do like the approach.
I've heard some anecdotal stories from companies that it's actually hard to underwrite Texas for one reason being on the commercial deployment side. Like Texas has all the variables, right? Like call it infinite natural gas. We have so much space and land. We have proximity to a lot of industrial users of heat and power and like all the variables, except for we've had arguably over deployment of solar and wind. And again, access to all the natural gas in the world. And so, and the power markets in Texas it's a free market. So nuclear currently has a really hard time competing with renewables and battery storage, at least during those hours of the day where power is close to free. And that's not very welcoming from the use case of deploying commercial nuclear power. So I think that the behind the meter case in Texas, the co-location, there's a strong use case for, for small portable type reactors. If we ever get to there's some really interesting use cases and other oil and gas specifically in the energy industry. But I think Texas is going to struggle in that particular area to solve for because there's been such a deployment of all forms of energy here that to underwrite commercial power generation that's not going straight into a data center or to another end user is challenging.
And I attended the Texas Nuclear Summit last year, and Pablo Vegas, the CEO of ERCOT, spoke. And a lot of people had left, and I was like kid in a candy store. I was like front row. And because this is the guy, riding the lightning of ERCOT, this deregulated power emporium. And I wanted to hear what he had to say, and he said that we should change energy markets to value variable energy, firm energy, and clean firm energy. And until we do that, we're not going to get the outcomes we want for nuclear.
Yeah, it's tough. And I mean, I'm of anyone, I want Texas to be the nuclear leader of the world. But that is some of the feedback I've heard from people trying to underwrite commercial deployment. It is challenging.
Yeah.
With the way that ERCOT's structured.
Brennan, this brings to mind also a piece of the puzzle that we haven't discussed of the gas price, right? And gas being the transition technology for standing up all of these AI data centers. You can't get a gas turbine for 3 to 5 years. I've heard stories of people are actually going to lesser developed markets, purchasing gas power plants, and then relocating the turbines, right? Yeah, anti-Robin Hood approach. So, and yet at the same time, despite the inability, despite the inability to get a gas turbine, the price of natural gas is flat to down. And so that one, I think that's going to change,
So my argument on that, Andrew, sorry to cut you off, is like the inelasticity of the demand market is much more significant than the elasticity of the supply. It takes 3 weeks effectively to like drill and frack a shale well ish, depending on where you are, versus it takes like 3 years to build a new power plant. And that's like a total mismatch in the supply and demand market. So
yeah, no, I agree. I think that as these turbines get stood up, though, we'll see the price of gas go up. There will be increased demand, and the inventories in Texas, at least, are pretty well understood and characterized. So we have a good idea of supply. And as demand rises over the next 3 to 5 years, we will see the price go up, and that makes the case for nuclear much more competitive in that market.
All right, I'll take the counter argument from you on that one. We can bet on that. Cheap gas forever. Cheap gas forever. So, guys, we're running out of time. This has been super fun. I can tell we got to do this again, like sooner than later. So, last question I want to leave you with: how do we keep this momentum going?
Yeah, I mean, I can start. I think, man, one of my views, it's why I'm devoting my life to be an investor and help people invest in this space, is you really learn once you start investing. Like until you start putting capital to work, you can read all you want. And until you start having to articulate to people why they should put their capital to work into the space, that you're just capped on your knowledge. So my view is start investing with public markets, private markets, start investing, start talking to people about what you're investing in and why, and start getting people around you, whether it's in a formal way or informal way, investing in the space. Because I think that that's really the best way to learn.
Build. I mean, I think that's what we need to start doing. We need to start breaking ground and building more projects. There's been a lot of talk, a lot of investment. It's time to see some fission electrons hit the grid.
I love it. What do you think, Ryan?
Post on the nuclear subreddit. I don't know. That seems to be the root of everything. Yeah, I just think you just got to get in the game. Like building, yes. Investing, yes. Asking questions, yes. I'm like a big grassroots guy, so I'm like, how are you plugging into your community around this? Are you like on a statewide group that's sending letters to legislators saying this is what we want? Because they don't receive those letters unless you write them. Like there's not some secret nuclear cabal out there. It's really like this very citizen driven thing. And we're so lucky to live in this country. And there's all these amazing methods to have your voice heard. And it kind of bums me out when you go to these meetings and there just aren't like young people or any people calling for nuclear. And I think that's part of our jobs too, like democracy requires participation. And I think this is a nice place, a nice bipartisan, like very outcomes focused place to spend your civic capital. So I encourage you to, get in the game.
That's awesome. Yeah. I'll echo Ryan's contribute to the conversation. Yeah. But post on social media, but not just in your echo chamber. Find opportunities to go and speak and talk to neighbors and talk to community members and get involved. And then put your money where your mouth is, like Brendan and Andrew said. So cool, guys. This has been awesome. Thanks so much for joining me. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for doing this, Mark.
Thanks, Mark.